It's now my honor to introduce you to our special guest speaker, Neil Helm. Most of you know Neil. Neil has a long career in space and advanced communication, research in corporate, government, and academic entities where he worked for over 40 years. The highlight of his space career was in 1995 when he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He did seminal research and development of space-based communications and GPS systems for the disaster mitigation and search and rescue communities. His systems and networks are still in use and have been credited with saving many thousands of lives. He has an MA in Transpersonal Studies from Atlantic University, a BSFS from Georgetown University. He also has his Certificate of Completion in AU's Integrated Imagery Regression Program, and he studied with Brian Weiss to become a professional hypnotherapist. He received his PhD in transpersonal psychology this June from Sophia University in Palo Alto, California. He served for 5 years as AU Scholar in Residence and taught research methods, conducted research, assisted faculty, and supported students in their research and culminating projects. The reason he's here today is because when he was 5 years old, he drowned in central Montana, and that near-death experience has impacted his entire life. Neil, come on down.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning. Really pleased to be here. As I've been, 5 years on the faculty of Atlantic University, where I was very honored. My wife, Fania Lord, and I moved down here from Washington, D.C. area 9 years, nearly 10 years ago, to be a part of this community, and we really feel home here with you. So I'm very pleased to talk to you today about my near-death experience and what I believe was EDGAR CAYCE's near-death experience. This usually is an hour-plus presentation. Kevin's given me 20 minutes, so let's sort of tighten your seatbelts and go. This is my disclaimer. We're all equal. We're all equal. All near-death experiences and all of it. We are all unique. We're all unique children of God. We're all equal. So that those of us who have had the experience of a near-death, we're no better or no worse or no brighter or less than anybody else. You've had different experiences, and so we all share our experiences. Okay. Aha.
The one on the right.
The one on the left.
Right.
How about the right? Ha. All right. Just definitions real quick. We're going to go again through these real quick. A lucid experience occurs at the time of, you can read these as actual death. Here's Bruce Grayson's. He's more influenced by the Kabbalah, so he's more involved in the mystical aspects of near-death experiences, and again, close or near death. Ken Ring, early near-death experience researcher, talks about being returned to your body, and it is not your time. That's one of the elements in my master's culminating project here, or thesis as it's called. There's two aspects that I looked at. One was how many people have had a vision or a meeting with a divinity, and the second minor one was, what does that divinity say to you? And in many times it says, it is not your time, and you come back, as it was with me. Ancient civilizations, we go back to the earliest written and oral communications, and we see that near deaths are part of this. Going to the earliest Vedas, the first Veda, and there's poems on reincarnation, and the poems talk about within one lifetime of dying and coming back and dying and coming back and dying again. And there's not just one, but there's numerous poems in the earliest, even before written times, oral traditions of near-death experiences. Gilgamesh of Sumeria, again, 1,500 years before Christ. Gilgamesh was a soldier and a statesman, had the typical near-death experience. He went through the tunnel, he went into this beautiful garden, gemstones, met with divinities, met with the sun god, and then was told he had to come back down through the tunnel and ended up being a statesman. So here we have 1,500 years before Christ, people who have had detailed, very detailed, definitive near-death experiences. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, which really, again, in the oral tradition, start way before the birth of Christ. And now it's continued on, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and the big word in there is bardo. And bardo, loosely translated as transition, but it's been broadened and broadened in that explanation. The Egyptian Book of the Dead. Now, the guy in the middle there is death in your soul. And does it look like he's lying down or not going anywhere? No, he's traveling. So again, this cycle of 2/3 or more of the people of the world in all of this time believed in the cycle of death and birth, and it is so natural, and you go through this cycle. And in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, again, they die, they come up and visit people for a while in the living, and then they go back and die again. So again, these near-death experiences are traditional and outlined again and again and again in the early writings in the early civilizations. 300 years before Christ, Plato's Republic talks about a soldier named U-R, sometimes spelled E-R, and was wounded mortally on the battlefield and lay on the battlefield for a number of days, and then his fellow soldiers picked him up and threw him up on a funeral pyre. And to their astonishment, here comes crawling off. And after a few days of rest, he tells about his near-death experience and going up and standing in front of God and having a choice of going to hell or going with God. And again, aspects of traditional near-death experiences in Plato, in the early Grecian civilization. There's a lot. There's a whole hour I could spend on this subject of again, early Christianity and the cycle of birth and reincarnation. John Van Auken has written an extremely excellent work on this as well, and others within the area community. It's interesting, this Judeo-Christian concept. We have taken, and again, I won't dwell on this, but we've moved mainstream Christianity away from reincarnation to where your death and is, you may lie for long periods of time, but I'm just, I don't want to get into that at this point. It's interesting, death and dying didn't really, because of, if you know that you're in reincarnation, that you're going to come back again and again and again, you really have no fear of death because you're going to come back again. And this very natural cycle. And it was finally in the Middle Ages that people, again, influenced by the early church, was you may not have that ability. So it was the Black Plague that really increased the concept of death and dying. And this is a composite sort of photograph here. You can see the Tower of Pisa in the background. And Pisa was one of the cities in Italy where 80% of the people died because of the plague, and they did have bodies lined up in the streets. They had no one anymore to take the bodies away, so they just laid there in the streets. So this really changed the concept of Europe and of the world, of that part of the world, the Christian world, of death and dying. And that's my fear. It's just driven today, death and dying. The average funeral today is $11,000, nearly $12,000. It's the cost of an average funeral today. Here comes good stuff. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her Death and Dying, to try to make it much more understandable and natural and give people the understanding that, it really can be a good thing. She, by the way, lived and had a farm in Southwest Virginia. And these pumpkins, this picture was taken of her in Southwest Virginia. And then she used the University of Virginia to give a lot of her talks, and there she met a young professor named Raymond Moody. And his book, Life After Life, was the first contemporary book on near-death experiences, and he coined the term near-death experience. So for the first time, people had a term that we call near-death experiences. 75. I can talk of reading that book and thinking before that I was the only one that had a near-death experience up to that time. My near-death experience, summer of 44, age 5. The Second World War was doing fairly well. My mother thought, the Allies invaded Normandy and that she could take a vacation really to help an aunt who was a physician in central Montana who lost all of her nurses to the war, and she needed really just help she had 3 hospitals, so that's another whole story. So we were there and we went swimming in a hot springs, which was like nearly about the size of this whole room. It was quite large. And in 44, there were only 2 little 40-watt bulbs for the entire place. It was really dark. It was inside like a barn. And we went swimming there, and I didn't realize that my older brothers and my mother and my aunt, there were 5 of us swimming, that they all could swim. I didn't know my older brothers could swim. We lived on a ranch in eastern Montana. And I thought, well, I'm 5, I can swim. So I started to swim. Went down like a rock. Drowned. I remember the last thing that I thought, whoa, this is going to be so painful, dying in this hot water nearly as hot as a hot tub. At that second, boom, I come out of my body, just in that second, the peace and serenity and just this feeling of love and openness just came over me. And I came out of my body, went into this beautiful field and lake, went across the lake, into a tunnel, up the tunnel, and there was no fear of this tunnel. And I guided up through the tunnel because I could see a light at the end of the tunnel. And I came out, and this is a sort of a picture of what it looked like. Everything on the other side, by the way, is vibration and light. And so this is sort of, I came out and it was light. It was much more bright than this. And it was like the whole wall was one whole wall really on my right. And so I turned towards it, and it said, I am God. At age 5, I said, yes, sir. Because I had been to Sunday school and knew of God and all of that. And there was such love and such perfection and such forgiveness and such beauty and such warmth. It's ineffable, that word where you cannot, I'll use words like love and forgiveness, but it's just greater than that. It's such a wonderful feeling. And I just stood there, and there's no time on the other side. So, you don't know how long it was, a minute or 2 probably. It was so wonderful. And then the voice said, it is not your time. And God speaks to me. We talk every day. He speaks to me in usually 5-word segments. It is not your time. And that turned out, and here is me, by the way, and that turns out to be in about 40% of all near-death experiences, they're told those exact 5 words. It is not your time. Again and again and again. A person in Central Africa is mauled by a lion and had a near-death experience, and he communicates in clicks, and that click was translated in English, and it came out that when he came out of his near-death experience, his mother God said, it is not your time. And a Bangladeshi truck driver was nearly killed in a truck accident, and when he came out in Urdu, it is not your time. So these patterns have developed, this tunnel, this meadow, these words. They are, again, over and over again. So I've now read more than 1,000 near-death experiences, and you see these patterns, and these patterns give credibility. It's just not one person saying this, it's thousands and thousands of people having these same experiences, saying these same words. So I'm going to go very, very quickly through this, but you just, again, ineffability, words can't define it, feelings of peace and quiet. Approximately 40, now this was my research, part of my research for my culminating project, tunnels. You go outside of your body, you meet spiritual beings, beings of light. Pretty much the light is there, pretty much in 70 or 80% of the people, they see the light. Again, this was the main part of my culminating project research, is that roughly half of all people meet some kind of divinity. I met God, some people meet Jesus, some people meet the Virgin Mary or a saint. And if you're of another religious group, you might meet Krishna or Muhammad, but you usually meet some kind of a divinity or family member that's passed before you. We're going to, again, return to your body. You have difficulty in sharing this. Your life is profoundly changed, as mine was since age 5. No fear of death. Those of us in the near-death community, we really have no, it's interesting, we have no fear of death. We've been there, we know how wonderful it is. So we look forward, in fact, to go back. We don't push it, but we know it's, we know it's there. And you have vivid memories, and some people would say, well, no, it's a hallucination. It's just a hallucination. Hallucinations are nearly always negative, always fearful, always sort of frightful. All these near-death experiences are wonderful, beautiful, nearly all of them. There are a few negative near-death experiences, but 90-some% of all near-death experiences are very, very positive. And that's one of the major differences. And again, some other people, the oneness of God, are spiritual. You tend to become less religious and more spiritual, and that's my doctoral dissertation, was on that subject. Universal love, service to others. And those of us who've had it, we're no brighter than anyone else, but you have this understanding of all knowledge. And the heart is also involved. Again, I could talk much more on this, but not only are the gray cells in your brain, but you have these same gray cells in the lining of your heart and in the lining of your gut. So that we have empathy and all that comes from your heart. And you walk up to the edge of a cliff, and where do you feel this sensation? In your tummy. So it's not all of this stuff is in your brain. There's a lot of inner knowing that takes place in other parts of your body. And this big thing is a oneness with the Creator. All knowing, again, I'm going through this. So transpersonal lifestyles. Once you have this near death, and you don't have to have a near death, you can have these same kind of experiences in meditation, deep meditation, in deep prayer. And so it's to get to the light of God. It's a lot of people especially in this community, get there through deep meditation. Okay, small bit of levity thrown in. And a lot of the near-death experiences happen, and it's called vertical perception, where you leave your body on an operating table and you go up and you look down at everything that's going on below. Okay, did Edgar Cayce have a near-death experience? I believe he did, and I believe that's the foundation of a lot of his gifts, but that's my belief and my gift and my research, and my understanding. There he is, handsome fellow, one of his earlier photographs. And here's Harmon and June Bro in this photograph in '43, just before they came to be with Edgar Cayce here in Virginia Beach. June, of course, is still with us, what, 97, I think? And Harmon died in 1997. Harmon and Edgar Cayce talking in '44. Harmon and June were here for approximately a year in the last year of Edgar's life, leading up to the last year of Edgar's life. And Harmon was writing his doctoral dissertation on Edgar Cayce. So part of his work here, as well as helping Edgar in running the reproduction machine, was to get a lot of information directly from Edgar Cayce on his life so that he could put that into his doctoral dissertation. So he and Edgar worked on Bro's dissertation, and Edgar Cayce said, these are the things that I want you to make sure that are in your doctoral dissertation. These are things that I want to make certain people remember of me. And one of these things was, and it took me, I knew that this was there. It took me 3 readings of Harmon Bro's A Seer Out of Season, The Life of Edgar Cayce, but I knew it was there. One sentence about 4/5 of the way through in that book. And this really is a quote. He told me how he had drowned and been pronounced dead in his youth. So Edgar Cayce said, I want you to make sure that this is in my memoirs, that you talk about this. And this is a quote, and how the invisible playmates of his childhood had returned to him as an adult. So this is a direct quote that Edgar Cayce gave to Harmon Bro, and it's in, again, the Seer Out of Season. So research, and you get permission at that time, I did from the late Charles Thomas, and got into the vault and got into the early writings. And these are the notes from Edgar Cayce's father, Leslie Cayce, also known as the Squire. These are quote, Edgar was an outdoor boy who liked to hunt and fish. You know, you can read this. After a heavy rain, really, really, really heavy rain, like some of the rains that we've had now with hurricanes, so that the lowlands were full of water in his little lake. And so he got a little fishing pole, Edgar did, and he started out perfectly alone, just down the hill to his little favorite fishing. And here's a picture of what it may have looked like. The difference here is that Edgar had a red hat. Everybody knew little Edgar because he had a big red straw hat. And so he went down to his little fishing place, and he realized the water had come up and there were a lot of little, probably crappies and sunfish that were caught in the grass, and he was throwing them up. And he ventured in this shallow water, and in his enthusiasm, he stepped to an unknown sinkhole. The hired men and people fished in this little pond. They all fished, and they knew about this sinkhole. It was 8 to 10 feet deep and probably this big around, and Edgar fell into it. And it just happened that a hired man came along with horses and saw Edgar's hat above the sinkhole, and here's a little perhaps rendition of it, and knew that Edgar had drowned or was drowning, and got off and pulled Edgar out of the hole and gave him simple resuscitation that pretty much everybody knew, and brought him back. Now, the Squire didn't want to give a lot of credit to this hired man because he was an African American. And so he rewrote this to some extent to say that no, Edgar got out himself. But in again Edgar's thing to Harmon Bro, I drowned in my youth. So the hired man pulled Edgar out of the sinkhole and gave him simple resuscitation, brought him back to life. And he put him on the logs and took him up to his mother, who was frightened by what he had told her in his near-death experience, and also what the hired man had told him. And so Edgar Cayce, soon after that, this is when all of this now happened, after what I believe was a near-death experience from his drowning. He read the Bible every day, he acquired the ability to remember complete books, all of these things all of you people know. He visits from angels and little people. the Helps Children Book of All Knowledge Akashic Records. We all have some of these gifts, and these are that we can acquire. Okay, so this is pretty much his abilities. I don't need to go through them. You know about Edgar Cayce's abilities. And how it changes our lives, oneness with God, universal love, service to others. And that we then develop this transpersonal lifestyle, transpersonal, beyond self, beyond. So it's beyond our ego, it's beyond ourself. It's in our dreams, it's in our meditations, it's in our contemplation. And this is how we become transpersonal in this community. And this is what Edgar Cayce, the legacy that he left us. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow.
A question or two? We have time for one question.
One question.
What took you so long to tell us this story?
Thank you. Well, I had to do the research. And again, I just finished my doctoral dissertation on it, so I now feel much more comfortable sharing it. And so yeah, it's time. Good. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.